they really encapsulate why gender identity is so insidious and just basically how unreal ideological it really is. And it gives us the language that we can incorporate that when we're having discussions with people, or when we're faced with gender speak, big sister gender speak, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's people that have been working on this for quite a long time who have really provided a solid foundation. I'm going to start with Kara Danksy because it really sets the foundation in terms of sex versus gender identity, in terms of just what these things mean and how one's reality-based and one is problematic, especially when it comes to law and policy. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through it chunk by chunk, get my reaction and Tania's reaction. And I'm sure off and on, can you believe someone has to take the time to be doing this? So it's a brief amicus from Women's Declaration International in support of the respondents. And Kara Danksy is the counselor of record for Women's Declaration International USA. Their goal is to never again will we return to a world where women are defined by the patronizing, regressive, and oppressive stereotypes of gender, of which gender identity is one form. The Women's Declaration International reaffirms women's sex-based rights, including women's right to physical and reproductive integrity and the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women and girls that result from redefinition of the category of sex to include gender identity. Yet, redefining sex to include gender identity is not a good idea. And what you find is how little this was thought out beforehand. But of course, it wasn't like there was deliberation and media coverage and any kind of assessment.
Somebody thought it out
in the
just
US.
Not the government. Our government's just took our orders.
WDI's interest in this case stems from its commitment to women and girls as a sex class and its opposition to practices that harm children. Relevant to this case involving obligations of government bodies to protect young people. The Declaration provides that states should recognize that medical interventions aimed at quote-unquote gender reassignment of children by the use of puberty-suppressing drugs, cross-sex hormones, and surgery should be prohibited. The Tennessee law at issue here aligns with the Declaration. WIUSA is interested in this appeal, first because as an organization, we cannot protect women and girls from harmful sex discrimination, invasions of their sexual privacy, and sex-based violence against women and girls if sex is judicially redefined to mean an amorphous continuum of subjectively felt genders that may not relate to sex at all. Yeah.
There's no connection to reality. No one can even define it. Yeah. Gender identity, what is that?
To protect children from the harms of what is referred to as gender-affirming care, i.e. the use of hormones that cause irreversible damage to young people's natural, physical, and psychological growth and development. And third, the linguistic destabilization. This is a key thing. Linguistic destabilization caused by the use of words like quote-unquote transgender is producing profound confusion throughout society as well as in law about what basic words like woman, girls, men, boys, sex, and gender mean. WDI USA has expertise in how the court can resolve such damaging and unnecessary confusion. And this is so damaging and it's so unnecessary.
It is really damaging and unnecessary. The gender lobby have spent a lot of time and money trying to make the case that gender people are the most marginalized, are the most at risk, are the most suicidal, and they don't actually have any sort of stats for that. The confusion is intentional, totally intentional.
And to be clear, there are people who refer to themselves as transgender, as non-binaries, all kinds of things, but I can refer to myself in all kinds of ways. If there's actually anything materially stable, consistent to those terms, there is not. And that's a problem when you're making laws based on it. So the summary of the argument, there is a deepening conflict over meaning in English-speaking world concerning the use of words that define some of our most basic realities. What is a woman? What is a man? What is sex or gender? Academics, therapists, doctors, journalists, and legislators continue to ask these questions, which implies, and every time they ask the question, it implies that it's up for questioning, that's a question that needs to be asked. So every time we play into this game, what is a woman, what is that? It implies that it's something that's up for debate. But of course, here we are. So the primary reason for the confusion about our basic biology is there has been an ongoing attempt for the 30 past years to redefine the terms woman and man and related terms such as boy, girl, sex, and gender, and in doing so, change the way we think about ourselves. Is a quote unquote transgender woman a woman or a man? Does performing stereotypical actions of the opposite sex make you become the opposite sex? Or are you simply a mimic? Yeah, so if I mimic the opposite sex, should people and the state and my employers go along that my performance actually makes me one? And if you think yes, what does it matter? Just game that out in your mind. Again, when anyone tries to redefine the word woman, we take it seriously. We are deeply invested in ensuring that the rights granted to us based on a stable definition of the past are protected. Further, we are clear about our sex. Listen, boys. And listen, everybody. We are female human beings. This recognition is demonstrably more accurate than notions from the framework of so-called gender identity. In fact, not a single one of us has a gender identity at all. Do you have a gender identity, Tania?
I don't, but sometimes I've toyed with the idea of having something really cool, maverick, renegade gender, hey? Because
Yeah.
they actually exist. There's websites and there's 300 and you can pick. And you can change as much as you want. Why do I have to be a boring middle-aged? Why can't I be a renegade gender? How fun is that?
Yeah. And all the accoutrements, like your birthstone, you can have your gender stone. Anyway, yeah. In fact, not a single one of us has a gender identity at all, notwithstanding the petitioner's absurd and utterly baseless contention that every person has a gender identity.
Right. That's forced teaming, eh? No, you've got one. No, you've got one.
It is a bit maddening to speak when the meaning of words is up for grabs. In the case of the word woman, for example, it's almost as if we're using homonyms, two words with the same sound but different meanings. One for the standard meaning and another for the proposed new meaning. For example, petitioners essentially contending that there are two types of women, one type of woman who is female and another type of woman who is male. We talked about this before, the so-called male woman, and us unintentional female women.
Yeah.
Female by accident.
Right. The intentional ones sound so much nicer. Oh,
Yeah.
some
I
sort of
really
religious
want to be
community.
a woman. Okay. Anyway, yes, this is a really neat linguistic trick. It is, but it is not grounded in reality. Furthermore, proponents of gender identity often say that sex and gender are different. We agree. At other times, they say they're the same. We disagree. Proponents of gender identity can never make any of their arguments make sense. But for them, the point is not to make sense. The point is to play with material reality and language. The entire ideology of gender identity is in the realm of faith, ignorance, and proclamation, in full contempt of any collaborative social reality with shared meanings. Entangled in our individual inner worlds, all people are meant to see our thoughts as facts, shadows of concrete reality.
Poetic. It's beautiful. For serious users of and people who care about the accurate use of language, woman is a time-stable noun that references one of the most basic categorical distinctions society must acknowledge: sex. A woman is an adult human female. This basic common sense word, spoken or written for centuries to refer to an essential member of the human family, is now being usurped and redefined by believers in gender identity to mean whatever any man wants it to mean. Worse, our words for female members of the human community are being hollowed out simply to serve as vessels for the creation of new gender identities with a seemingly endless set of behavioral and costume possibilities. Woman, man, boy, girl, sex, gender. All words warped by transgenderism and its unending, boring fascination with sex stereotypes.
So now menstruation, breastfeeding, pregnancy, mother, all this stuff has to be contorted so as to fit or not discriminate against people's perceived gender identities. And again, we're constantly told this isn't a big deal. It's progressive, it's inclusive, it's really amazing.
I love how they threw in the in last line, transgenderism and its unending boring. I love that. That truly it's not that interesting. You're not interesting because you have a gender identity. Saying that you're queer doesn't make you interesting. Everybody can see what you are. No one cares about your stupid pronouns. They're totally superficial. Back to reality. If it weren't so ridiculous and outrageous, we'd all be bored off our tree.
the notion of gender identity, that the stereotypes aren't the problem. It's this locking them into female or male is the problem. Or feminists would say that anybody can do the dishes. An old school sexist would say that women should do the dishes. And gender ideology says that whoever does the dishes is the woman.
Right. That's right. Yeah, except we know that these men mimicking women aren't doing dishes unless they're dressed in some god-awful scanty thing and being photographed doing it for, kicks on Reddit. That's the only way they're doing dishes. They're putting on their costumes and they're not, sorry to go on a rant, but they're putting on their costumes and they're not doing the damn dishes. They're not vacuuming, okay? It's not about that. If this was just about them wanting to do dishes, I'm sure we would go for it.
Transgender, in quotes, children and adults ask us all to accept their claims of having a hidden feeling, experience, or essence, something that leads them to believe that there is a mismatch between what they are feeling and thinking and imagining and the sexed reality of their human bodies. Many go further then and claim that alleviating the strain of this mismatch requires the recognition of rights, especially to gender-affirming care, for mental health, therapists, endocrinologists, and surgeons in order to modify their bodies. And I think this is an important thing because people will be, why do you care? Like we're just prying, like we really don't want anyone to have a quote unquote gender identity. If you want to believe you have a gender identity and there's incongruence with your body and whatever, that's one thing. But when it comes to demanding rights and affirmation and recognition that affect others and promote this fiction, then, sorry, it becomes everybody's issue.
Yeah, totally.
In particular, women and kids.
And it remains to be seen, but what I don't see in this paragraph is that term gender dysphoria. And I think if they're not going to use it, I think that's a sharp move because a lot of people are saying gender dysphoria as if it's a real thing, right? And that's contentious. Is it a real thing, gender dysphoria, or is it something that they invented so that they could medicalize it? For example, dysphoria, I have age dysphoria. I spend hours at night when I'm not sleeping thinking, okay, the rest of my life is all going downhill. How many more years left do I have? I have true age dysphoria. It's an honest thing. Like it keeps me up at night. What cure is there for me? What can I do? Nothing, right? We just have to lump it. We all have dysphoria of some kind or other. I like that they didn't come out with some of these kids feel gender dysphoria. Well, so what, kids? You don't get to change reality. I don't get to change my age. I can't start counting my age except for revolutions of the earth around the sun. That's the only way that's available to me, really.
Or demanding that's out of line with your internal clock. And so we have to have orbital identities.
Right? Can you imagine if I go try and enroll in high school?
Yeah. Just dysphoria sounds like, dysphoria. It basically means unhappy. Yeah. Distressed. Yeah. And of course, they would say that it's persistent, consistent, etc.
Sure, they would say that.
The idea of going from there to this Pandora's gender box. Okay, let's see what else.
As feminists, however, we find ourselves having to wearily point out that biological sex differences do not exist because of a theoretical belief. They simply exist. As we generally understand the world, our bodies exist prior to the language others teach us to use when referring to our already sexed bodies. In contrast, there is no shared or commonly understood evidence for gender identity or transgender children. And so we find ourselves forced to pit common sense and historical fact against modern day conjecture and claims to transcendence. Lovely.
And think of all the other things that Kara and other people could be doing besides this. But again, we are where we are.
Yeah, that's right. Why are we making this woman do this busy work?
In real life, the redefinition of woman or girl leads to an abrogation of the rights of the female sex. Past laws regarding sex-based rights refer to women and sex, and everyone, society and the courts, knew very well what we all meant, and no one had to define these terms.
Now, this court is being asked to see and understand a new category of women, supposedly male women, but the concept is so vague and variable, its meaning so packed with delusions, half-truths, and lies, that it is not a suitable candidate to serve as a subject at law. That was essentially the conclusion of the court below, which this court should affirm. Gender identity is nothing more than a self-perception that can be changed at will, as evidenced by people who have detransitioned out of a gender identity, or by people who change their preferred pronouns every Wednesday.
Yeah. And I think this is a tell, particularly when it comes to law, but who gets to go into the ladies' room at the cinema or any place where it's not a single stall? And to people who are idiots, like, what about your bathroom in your house? Or what do these gender criticals think about the airplane bathroom? First of all, we're not talking about single stall bathrooms. And second of all, people's bathrooms inside their house are not public.
It's such a stupid gotcha.
And I also don't want my family members walking in on me when I'm in the shower or whatever. Usually you lock the door, but sometimes you forget. And it's worse, it just is, if it's my
Yeah.
son walking in on me than if it's my daughter, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, poor kid. He doesn't want to walk in on his mom either, right? And it's such an old argument. Like, I thought we put that to paid in Twitter 2019. Come up with
I
some
know,
new
it
ones
keeps
because we've already
mhm.
stopped that one.
If your law is focused on group X or place X, and then you have to go into paragraphs to talk about what that is and isn't, probably not well defined enough to be in law. When you had laws about women, sex-based laws, or other protected characteristics, no one had to explain who was included in that and who isn't.
Yeah, it's totally not intuitive. It's totally convoluted, and it involves the suppression of logic.
The distinction between gender identity and sex couldn't be sharper. Alessandra Astridi,
She's that Italian lawyer. She's great.
a national law scholar, recently reviewed a case in Scotland that involved a conflict between the recognition of biological sex differences as an objective fact and the quote unquote woman identity of a quote unquote transgender male who insisted he had the right to invade women's spaces. She warns, while truth is not required in order for a belief to be protected, the law needs to make distinctions between things that are true and things that are not. Reality and delusions cannot hold the same value, or society descends into chaos. Yeah.
She's right.
And
And
all you have to do is look at women's sports to see
yeah,
that.
totally. It should just
Mhm.
be about facts, right? It
Yeah.
shouldn't be like gender identity is a belief or being gender critical is a belief. No, we're not dealing with beliefs. We're dealing with reality and delusions, which is what the quote illustrates. When it comes to historical shifts in linguistic meaning, some proposed changes are socially damaging. Observing that words can shift and change meaning over time does not mean that all changes are rational or useful to all groups. Attempts to enshrine gender identity into law are bound to lead to confusion in society and harm, especially to women and girls, and especially lesbians. It's clear which choice the law must make. It must be predicated on the continued existence of sex.
Yeah. Again, you just want to say after each one of these paragraphs, duh. So fighting all those battles to go through and really whittle back sex-based discrimination, and then to have that all thrown out the window because of gender identity is, I don't know, but here we are. Amicus argues that the word transgender, in quotes, is a linguistic sleight of hand that cannot be protected legally as a quasi-suspect class under equal protection analysis because it has no coherent meaning. It is not an immutable trait and does not describe a politically powerless group of people. 2. Children have an international human right to grow into adulthood and be protected from the physical and psychological harms that result from suppressing puberty and/or administering opposite-sex hormones. And 3. Sex is grounded in material reality. Gender, including linguistic derivatives like gender identity, transgender, and cisgender, is grounded in regressive sexist stereotypes that have historically harmed women.